And gentlemen, welcome to Martin Luther College. We're very pleased to have you with us here this evening. We are sure that you will enjoy your evening. We have a wonderful presenter here with us tonight. My name is Steve Balza, and it's my privilege to serve as the Director of Alumni Relations here at this college. I, along with perhaps many of you, and many of you perhaps watching online, had the privilege of having our presenter as a history teacher here at DMLC or MLC. I considered him to be my primary source for learning about primary sources. Tonight's presentation will be just that, a primary source history report about a day and age that many of us have only read about, Nazi Germany, 1938. A couple of logistical items before we begin. We'll ask that you please do silence your cell phones. This is being recorded and also will be streamed live on the web and will be archived for those of you who have friends and neighbors who were unable to make it this evening. Encourage them to go to the MLC website, click on MLC TV, and they should be able to watch it tomorrow morning at their leisure. Also, if anyone has need of restrooms, we'll ask you to go out the doors to your left. Ladies would go down the hallway to the left. The restroom is right at the beginning of the stairwell. Gentlemen would go to the right side, and the restroom is at the T. Without further ado, then, it's my privilege to introduce to you tonight Professor Ted Hartwig.
Good evening to all of you. Can you hear me? I hope the evening will still be good when I'm done. I hesitated to do this. For one reason, because of my age and the infirmities which come with age. One of those infirmities is a bad back. And that's why I have to sit. I can't stand for long. Another problem is getting off the track and talking about things that may become boring. That's a hazard for old people. It's more of a hazard for former history teachers. And my other concern was memory lapse. I know the word, I know the name, I want to use it, and bingo, it's gone. Probably that's happened to some of you too. And then I think and think and think, and it won't come back until I'm not thinking about it anymore. So what I've done is brought along a batch of cheat cards to help me if there are memory lapses. Now, Steve Balza, in his invitation, wrote that this will give you an eye-opening look at history in the making. I don't know if that's going to happen. You'll have to judge that for yourself, if this will be an eye-opening look. I'll try. And what I'd like to do is jump right into in medias res. I would like to begin tonight with my first day in Germany and forget about those long introductions, such as what was the purpose of this trip to Germany and how did I luck out to become a part of it and how much did it cost me? There's time for your questions after a while. But there are some preliminaries that you must know. First of all, there were 33 American boys from all over the country in this group. We were there during the months of July and August. About 1/3 of the boys were my age, 16, 17, 18. The rest of them were from colleges and universities, and chiefly from the Ivy schools out east, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia. And to my great surprise, among those 33 American boys, I never checked out on this, but only 3 or 4 of us were fluent in German. I learned German at my mother's knee. And there was a rule in our house during my childhood and grade school years that when we walked into the house, we had to talk German. I didn't always appreciate that. By the way, when we had company, we could talk English. But I was very appreciative of this when I entered prep school. Then knowing German was a big help. So, 33 boys from all over America in our group. Our transportation was by ship. We rode to Germany and back from Germany in the 2 largest vessels in the North German Lloyd fleet. Europa going over, Bremen coming back. Both were sunk during the war. And finally, let's see now. The pictures. Most of these pictures were taken with my mother's camera. She bought the camera in 1913, so it was an antique. And I was a rank amateur at photography. She used this camera when she went over to Germany in 1913 and attended the Conservatory of Music in Leipzig, Germany. And then when the war broke out, August 14, she was one of the stranded Americans who were helped by Herbert Hoover to get back to America. She found her way back by way of Norway and a tramp steamer and had a very rough voyage over the ocean. So, that has to do with my preliminaries. Now, I would like to begin with my first day in Germany. I've got to find my cheat card here. We docked at the harbor of Bremen, downriver from Bremen. The ocean-going vessels could not get as far as Bremen. We docked at 9 o'clock on an early July morning. Excuse me. The man who had dreamed up this trip, Dr. Colin Ross, lived in Austria. He was of Scottish ancestry, spoke English perfectly. He met us when we disembarked. Then we took a train to Bremen. And we were checked into our hotel, large hotel with huge private rooms for each of us. My roommate was the son of a Lutheran pastor from Virginia. And we were roommates in hotels throughout the trip. 2 other boys were down the hall from us that had been our cabin mates in the ship. Well, when we looked out of the window of our hotel room, that's what we saw. The depot is over there in the distance. And what impressed me most of all is what isn't on this slide. 3-wheeled automobiles. Some with a wheel in front, some with a single wheel in the back. After we were checked in, we were given a tour of Bremen. And among the sights in Bremen, before we made that tour, we were introduced to our tour leaders. They were all members of the Nazi Party, and perhaps they were high officials in the Hitler Youth. 5 of them. 2 of them did all the advance arranging for hotels, for youth hostels, for restaurants, tickets to museums. One of them, the man second from the left, was our doctor. The man second from the right paid all the bills. And by the way, I'm not sure who paid those bills, most of those bills, either the German government or the Nazi Party. I don't know. And then at the right was our leader, fine young man. I imagine all of these leaders were in their 30s and early 40s. And that man to the far right is a Yalie, Yale University, Yale College student. So we were given a tour of Bremen, bus tour, and I took this picture of the cathedral in Bremen, and nothing architecturally noteworthy about it. The reason I took the picture is because it's something I saw in the undercroft, in the crypt, under the floor. Down there were 8 human bodies laid out on a platform from the Middle Ages, 1400s, 1500s, and in a perfect state of preservation. I couldn't take that picture because of my camera didn't have flash attachments. But we were told that they were so well preserved because of the radioactivity in the soil under the church. Then, that's too far. I want to tell you about my first night in Bremen. My my room partner, son of the Lutheran pastor from Virginia, and I, it had become dark now, and we were playing rummy, I think, in our room when someone knocked on that front window showing the depot and the districts. And it turned out to be our 2 cabin partners from the ship who were in a room farther down the hall. And they wanted to get in. And we wouldn't do that. We didn't know what would come of that if we let them into the room. Well, after much cajoling, they left. And shortly after they left, we heard a woman yelling bloody murder in the room right next to us. Help, help, in German, of course. She was terrified. She didn't know. What are these 2 young men after? Are they going to rob me? Are they going to assault me? And then I heard one of the 2 boys, he was a fullback on a football team, build he had, saying to her in as calm a voice as he could, "Lady, we won't hurt you." And then they left. And in a little while, some hotel officials were up there talking to her in the room. I couldn't overhear what they were saying. And then things quieted down. The next morning, there was an investigation. The hotel officials and our German leader talked to us because our room was right next door to that woman's room. And so we had to explain the whole story to her, what had happened. And fortunately, the affair settled down. That was the end of it. That was my first night in Germany. Next morning, we were taken by train to Berlin. And after we were checked into our hotel, my father's cousin, Paul Kahler, called for me at the hotel. Now, a number of you are familiar with that name, Kahler. Paul Kahler was the son of Professor J.P. Kahler's brother. And this son worked as a foreign correspondent for a German newspaper. And his position took him all over the world, particularly to Latin American countries. Well, he called for me at the hotel, and then we walked down into downtown Berlin. And we looked at the famous Brandenburg Gate, which was not destroyed from Allied bombs, and the gate which separated the East German and West German parts of Berlin. Then we walked along one of the main streets of Berlin. There it is. And on the side of the street, I saw an enormous billboard with two men. One of them was sitting on a bench. And you couldn't mistake him. That was Shylock, a Jew. And the person standing in front of him and leaning over him with a pointed beard and horns, you wouldn't mistake him either, the devil. And then underneath, at the bottom of the billboard, these words: Wer den Juden kennt, kennt den Teufel. I was shocked. Whoever consorts with a Jew consorts with the devil. I was shocked. And I turned to my father's cousin and said, "What's this all about?" He said, "Quiet. I'll tell you about this when we get to my house." And there he told me he was not a Nazi. He was opposed to the whole Nazi regime. But he didn't want to talk about this out in the open. And then he took me back to the hotel. I should add that in 1936, the Olympics were held in Berlin, Summer Olympics. This was Hitler's showpiece, as the Winter Olympics last month were intended to be Putin's showpiece. Have you been able to hear me? Thank you. And before those 1936 Olympics, all advertisement, anti-Semitic advertisement, disappeared. Germany, the Nazis, were going to put their best face forward. Now, this was 2 years later. They were all back up again. All right. That was my experience with my father's cousin, Paul Kahler, in Berlin. The next day, we were taken on a tour of Berlin, and we visited the famous Museum of Antiquities, in which is located the famous Pergamon altar shown here. That altar was constructed in Pergamon, modern Turkey, in 150 BC for the rulers of the kingdom of Pergamon at that time. They were followers of Alexander the Great, that family. And they had defeated, the kingdom of Pergamon had defeated the barbarians east of Pergamon. And to commemorate their victory over the barbarians, they had this altar built with beautiful sculptures from that time. Well, in the late 1800s, German archaeologists received license to do excavations in Pergamon. And the liberal Turkish government at that time permitted them to take apart this museum and to ship it to Berlin. That kind of thing would never happen today, of course, as you all know. That's the famous Pergamon Museum in the Pergamon altar in the Museum of Antiquities. Then we watched the changing of the guards at the memorial in honor of the unknown soldiers from World War I. And for the first time in my life, I became acquainted with goose stepping. The soldiers put out their legs about 1 yard above the ground, and then the other line. Then they come down. It must be a lot of work. I've never seen goose stepping before. Well, they're goose stepping here in front of that memorial. Then we were taken by bus to Potsdam, several miles outside of Berlin. And here a picture of our group was taken formally. The doctor is second from the left in the front row, and by this time you probably found me. Right side, front row, second from the right. Now, if you can make it out, above the palace door, there are two words. It's hard to see that. It's not too clear. Sans souci, S-A-N-S, S-O-U-C-I. That means without care, without worry. This palace was constructed during the reign of Prussia's great military ruler, Frederick the Great, 1740 to 1786. Not only was he a great military, can you hear me? Is it okay? Can you hear me? Technology. How is it now? Is it better? No. How is it now? Good. This is all being recorded. Anyway, I was talking about Frederick the Great. Not only was he a military genius, but he was also very fond of music. He played the flute. He composed music. He invited Bach to visit him, as well as the French philosopher Voltaire. Voltaire was there for several months, and he tried to teach Frederick how to conduct wars, and Frederick tried to teach Voltaire about philosophy. They didn't get along with each other. So Voltaire sneaked out one night, found his way back, and settled down in Geneva, Switzerland. I think he died the year before the French Revolution, 1789. I think he died in 1788. Well, that was Potsdam. There's the stadium in Berlin that was constructed for the 1936 Berlin or Summer Olympics. Then we went by train to Eisenach. That's Bach's birthplace, and where Luther spent 9 months after his appearance before the German rulers in Worms in 1521. Luther was here at the Wartburg Castle for 9 months, from 21 to 22, and he translated the New Testament from the original Greek during those 9 months. Well, when my room partner and I walked into our room at night, I saw an unforgettable sight. Up there, on top of the hill, 1,000 feet up, a full moon was shining over the Wartburg Castle where Luther stayed. Of course, I couldn't take a picture, but I did the next morning. That is a picture of the Wartburg which one often sees. And this is another often seen picture of the entrance to the Wartburg. Notice the tower there. That's in the center of the castle. When we were there in 1538, we could still climb that tower. And I took this picture from the top of the tower down into the part of the castle where Luther stayed. And in the distance, the beautiful Thuringian woods. I've been back to the Wartburg several times since 1972, and One can't climb that tower any longer. From Eisenach, we took a train to Nuremberg. I think that's right. I want to make sure. Yes. And this is a photograph of part of the town wall. So is that. That town wall was almost completely destroyed in the Second World War and has been rebuilt since. Notice the huge towers at intervals along the town wall. In Nuremberg, there are two large places of worship. This is the Protestant or evangelical church, St. Lorenz. Back at Luther's time, the pastor at this church was a man by the name of Andrew Osiander. He attended that famous debate with Luther and other Lutheran theologians at Marburg in 1529, where Luther and his associates debated with the Swiss reformers and came to the conclusion that they could not come to an agreement on the teaching of the Lord's Supper. Well, St. Lorenz Church was bombed to pieces during the war and then rebuilt with Rockefeller millions. So it looks just like that today. The other large church in Nuremberg is called St. Sebaldus. Now I'm going to get off the track again because of two candlesticks that we saw in St. Sebaldus Church on each side of the altar, made of metal. I don't know what kind, could have been steel. And at the top of the shaft, a large bowl to catch the wax from the candle drippings, and around the stem, a grapevine. And attached to the grapevine, grape bunches and many leaves. All of this in metal. My college colleague here at the college visited Nuremberg in the 1970s with his son. And he was entranced by those candlesticks and had his son take a picture of one of them. And when they got back, he gave this picture to a metal worker here in Nuam and ordered 2 candlesticks like the ones here in Nuremberg. And when the work was done, he donated them to the college. Now, this used to be our chapel. And those 2 candlesticks stood on either side of the altar here in this former chapel. But because of all the moving in and out that went on, because of concerts, because of plays, and so on, in that process, over perhaps an interval of 10 years, those leaves all fell off. And so did the grapes. And whatever happened to those candlesticks, I never found out. But they're gone. That is my excursion because of the association of this church with our college. This is a picture I took along the town wall. And on the left is the home of Germany's greatest artist, Albrecht Dürer. We were given a visit. We visited the entire house. But Albrecht Dürer was fascinated by Luther. And if he had lived longer, he might have he might have become a Lutheran member. He wanted to paint a portrait of Luther, but he died in 1528. He was Germany's greatest artist at that time, and this is his house in Nuremberg. Outside of Nuremberg, the Nazis had a big place for Nazi rallies. There were big structures like this, assembly halls. There was a stadium there that seated 500,000 people. And this entire area was bombed to pieces during the Second World War. Then we took a train to Munich. And everyone who visits Munich is sure to have a meal at the Hofbrauhaus. We had a noon meal here at the Hofbrauhaus. And all they serve is sauerkraut, wieners, and beer. And we were sitting at large round tables, maybe 8 people to a table. And after we had begun eating our meal, about 3 tables down from where I was sitting, there was a big commotion between 2 waiters and one of our students. Well, I didn't know what was going on there, but after the meal, I inquired, what was all that commotion about? And this is what I found out. One of the boys in our group was a Latter-day Saint. And Mormons, strict Mormons, may drink only water or milk. Well, this boy was out of luck. He had a choice between beer and beer. So he went outside, and found a store, and bought himself a quart of milk and brought that into the Hofbrauhaus. And those waiters were incensed. No one has ever brought milk into the Hofbrauhaus. I don't know what came of this and whether they allowed him to drink his milk or not. This is Munich's City Hall. One noon, we were entertained, our group of 33 Americans was entertained by the mayor of Munich and other high officials of the city at a long table with a very fine meal, including wine in pretty good-sized glasses. When we left the city hall and came outside, we were going to go to another museum. A number of boys in our group seemed to be mighty happy. And when I inquired, well, they said we had 5, 6, 7 glasses of wine. And I found out that if you drained your glass, the waiter was right there and refilled it. If you left just a tiny bit in the bottom of the glass, they didn't fill it. And that's what I did. So I had not quite 1 glass of wine, which was a good thing for me. This is a memorial to honor a number of Nazis who were killed in 1923 in what is called the Putsch, P-U-T-S-C-H. It was Hitler's attempt at overthrowing the German government. Well, the Putsch failed, and a number of his followers were killed. Hitler himself was imprisoned, where he wrote his Mein Kampf, My Struggle, his biography. Well, after the Nazis came to power, those men who were killed were enshrined in this memorial. 2 soldiers standing in front of it, and those are the caskets inside. This place, too, was bombed out of existence during the Second World War. From Munich, I need a bigger ear. From Munich, we took a bus to into the Bavarian Alps, arrived there in the dark, and this is the village next to the youth hostel where we stayed for 10 days. The village is called Urfeld, and the lake is called the Walchensee. And there's the youth hostel. We were the first residents. It was brand new. And it was named after the supreme leader of the Hitler Youth, Baldur von Schirach. When the leading Nazis were tried after the war in 1946 and 47, he was one of the 23 Nazis tried there at Nuremberg. And while a number of them were sentenced to death, others were sentenced to 20 years prison in life, and he was one of the men sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. And then after his 20 years, then he lived another 6 to 7 years after that. He was in his 30s at this time. This is a shot from the youth hostel out into the lake. We were joined at this hostel by 30 boys, about my age, members of the Hitler Youth, somewhat similar to the Boy Scouts here. And all of the 30 boys who were to be our companions here at the hostel were leaders of their local troops. Bunch of fine young men. Well, the hope was that there would be camaraderie between the Germans and the Americans. And at that time in 1938, I don't think that many Germans were able to speak English, as is true today. I made it my practice to pal around with these 3 Hitler Youth. Fine young men. And one day we were sitting there outside of the hostel, and I asked them in German, "Do you still go to church?" And they looked at one another, and they asked the same question to one another, and all of them said, "No." Our activities at the hostel over these 10 days were more or less like this. Reveille was at about 6:30 in the morning. We had to pull on some shorts and a pair of shoes and go down to the lake and run on the road for half a mile over to the village of Urfeld. And then we ran a half a mile back to the hostel. Then we got dressed. And then we stood outside the hostel, and we lined up, kind of a military formation. The Germans were much better at that than we Americans. And we each sang our national anthem, and our national flag was raised on the 2 flagpoles. So this is a picture of the German boys standing, and are they singing? Maybe or maybe not. Anyway, there they are. There were 2 large bedrooms in the hostel, each bedroom with about 20 double-deckers. The Germans slept in one bedroom, we slept in the other bedroom, and this is my picture of the dining room. And that brings to mind another story I have to tell you. After I had been there a couple of days, I wrote one of my many letters to my parents. And among other things, I said to my mother, "I am so sick and tired of these breakfasts. They're always the same. Oatmeal every morning. Heavy, dark German rye bread with margarine and orange marmalade. Morning after morning, the same breakfast. And then something that was supposed to be coffee. Well, it wasn't coffee. I guessed it was barley, roasted drink made from roasted barley. That's just a guess. So I wrote this letter, and I told my parents, and my mother especially, how much I was waiting to eat her whole wheat homemade bread again. What I didn't know was, and I didn't find this out until I was home again, my father had given my letter to the editor of the local newspaper in my hometown of Heartland, which is halfway between Milwaukee and Watertown. At the time, the population was 945. Anyway, my father gave that letter to the local editor of the local newspaper. And when I got home, they saved that edition of the paper, and I saw my letter, and then I saw the headlines, big, bold letters. Hartwig boy homesick for mother's homemade bread. I shouldn't have written that. Our activities varied from day to day. Most days we swam in the waters of that lake fed by streams, ice-cold streams coming out of the mountain. Then, on 2 days, we climbed mountains. This mountain was right behind our hostel, 6,000 feet high. We took pack lunches with us that day, and we climbed to the top of the mountain. Then we took the saddle from the first mountain to the second mountain. That's the path that we had to walk. Other days, we went on excursions to other places. Oh, that's Salzburg. We don't want that. Such as a hydroelectric plant where the water was channeled through pipes into the hydroelectric plant. Now, I'm not going to tell you about that hydroelectric plant, but I'm going to tell you about the restaurant at the bottom of that at the bottom of that plant. I saw a wine card there. Everyone had a wine card at his plate. The most interesting wine card I ever saw. There were 51 varieties of wine listed there. There we go. It's all on tape. Red wine, white wine, sparkling wine. But what made this wine card so unique, each wine was described, what the wine was good for. And most of the time, very humorously. I'll give you an example. This wine is good für Tenöre und andere Schreihälse. Now, a Schreihals is a common word in German, often used in a humorous context. If I translate the word literally, it comes out throat screamer. Well, there's nothing funny about throat. We don't talk like that. So now I'll give you a translation in American idiom. This wine is good for tenors and other loudmouths. Here are some of the other descriptions, all of them in English. The best guarantee against loss of hair. Very suitable for the clergy and other poor people. For divorcees and merry widows. Puts an end to all grumbling. And the last one I'll read, drink this and you will have no inhibitions. I saved that card. One evening, we were bused to Munich to take in an opera, naturally by Richard Wagner, who was Hitler's darling, because his operas generally romanticize early German history of the Middle Ages. Well, we saw the opera, The Flying Dutchman. At the intermission, we walked outside to get some fresh air. And across the street, I saw a huge throng of people in front of a house. And I asked some of the Germans standing by me, what are all those people doing there? And they told me, Hitler is in the house. Well, now I had a choice. Should I stay outside and wait to see whether I might see Hitler in the flesh, mind you? Or should I go back into the opera? I think you can guess what I did. I went back to the opera. But Hitler did come out, jumped into a car and went off. Then, from Munich, we went to Salzburg. That's the castle. These scenes in Salzburg have become very famous on account of the Sound of Music. Now, that first night, we had a fine meal, evening meal, and a Nazi gave a propaganda speech to us. And then we watched a marionette show of Mozart's life at this theater. Now, American tourists nowadays don't go to Salzburg to see Mozart's life. They go for the Sound of Music. That came out in '64. And Austrians were never very happy about that, because 85 to 90% of the Austrians favored what is called the Anschluss, the annexation, which had happened in March. I heard on television, maybe 6 to 8 weeks ago, that the Sound of Music has been translated into German, and that this new generation, probably 2 generations later, do enjoy seeing the Sound of Music. This is a shot of the city of Salzburg, which I took from the castle. Then we were taken by bus to the most beautiful lake in Germany. There it is, the Königssee, King's Lake. We went by launch from one end of the lake to the other. And this was the scene at the end of the lake, which I took and had enlarged with my camera. Another picture. Near this lake, one of Hitler's pals had built at the very top of the mountain what is called the Eagle's Nest. And that's where Hitler would go for vacation, entertain his buddies up there. We didn't see it. But I have read that it was not destroyed during the war and is a great tourist attraction today. From Salzburg, we traveled by bus to Innsbruck, which is in the westernmost part of Austria, at the north end of the Brenner Pass, from Italy through western Austria into Germany. And we were given a cable car ride to the top of the mountain next to Innsbruck. And from that mountaintop, you can see the mountains of Italy, of Switzerland, of Austria, and of Germany. We'll go back to Innsbruck. I want to tell you what happened the night we were there. It was such a beautiful, balmy night. Quiet, temperature maybe 70. And I was playing cards at a table with 3 Hitler Youth. And about 50 yards away from us was a band shell. And the orchestra was playing Strauss waltzes. Beautiful. And then the director came to the microphone and announced, if anyone would like to ask for us to play something, we'll be happy to accommodate you. So I walked to the band shell and asked the director, in German of course, whether he would be willing to play the Barcarolle from Offenbach's opera, The Tales of Hoffmann. His answer shocked me. He said, no, I can't play Offenbach's Barcarolle because Offenbach is a Jew. That's what happened since March. All Jewish music was verboten. Now, before we start to throw stones for Hitler and his jaundiced mind, a Jew was an enemy. Not only of the German people, but the whole human race. And you shoot your enemy. You kill them. When we entered the First World War in 1917, the same thing happened here with German music. It was kind of risky to play German music. Even sauerkraut was given a different name. Oh. My father was 29 years old, and he was serving a congregation across the Mississippi from Red Wing. Red Wing is about 60 miles south of the Twin Cities, right on the Mississippi. He was serving a congregation on the other side of the Mississippi, and he was preaching German on Sundays. And the people in town, not church members, threatened to tar and feather him if he kept on preaching German. That's what happened here. And then a bucket of yellow paint was splashed against the side of the parsonage. From Innsbruck, we went to a German encampment a little bit west of Munich, down there in southern Germany. And we stayed here 3 days, and we lived in a tent. The mattress was stuffed with straw, and I found out it was very comfortable. Straw doesn't make a bad stuffing for a mattress. Anyway, these are pictures of the 3,000 Hitler Youth who were at that encampment. And on the last day, we had lunch with Baldur von Schirach, the supreme head of the Hitler Youth. And we listened to speeches in praise of the Nazis. He's sitting at the wheel there. He's about 32 years old here, sitting in that sports car. I should add at this place that one evening, 8 of us were selected to meet for a banquet with some high officials of the SS party. SS stands for Schutzstaffel, or in English, Security Service. That organization was founded in 1933 and served as Hitler's excuse me, Hitler's bodyguard for Hitler and other high officials. And then it was given other duties like our CIA. And eventually, they were given charge of the concentration camps. And the head of the SS was Heinrich Himmler, whose name you've probably heard. And he was a brute just as bad as Hitler. By the way, after the German defeat, he tried to flee to Scotland. And he was caught at the border, incarcerated, and in prison, he chewed down on a cyanide tablet, and that did him in. From this youth encampment, getting to be an hour long here, we'll try to hurry this. We visited these rebuilt huts built on piles sunk into Lake Constance, the lake between Germany and Switzerland. And these people lived here about 5,000 years ago. Then we visited Heidelberg. You see the castle there on the side of the hill. And the university at Heidelberg is the oldest in Germany, founded in 1386. And that evening, 4 of us took a walk from our hotel down across the bridge to the other side of the Neckar River, stopped at a wine place on the way back, and then returned to our hotel. Oh, that's a bad shot. That is one of the castles along the Rhine River from which I took this picture, Burg Stahleck. And 4 of us in the afternoon crawled out onto the sloping castle roof, and I took this picture of the Rhine River below us. Then our leader caught sight of us. And he told us in no uncertain terms to get off that roof. And he met us at the bottom and gave all of us Strafarbeit. Disciplinary work. We had to peel potatoes for supper that night. Another shot of the Rhine River. This picture is much better. Cologne Cathedral took 500 years to build. And we're home. Statue of Liberty. Now, when we disembarked from the ship, there was a letter for me from one of the Hitler Youth. How that letter got onto that ship and got to me, I don't know. And this is what he wrote in his letter as I translated it. And he's talking in view of the Anschluss that Austria was attached to Germany in March 1938. He writes, "Now where the ominous clouds have been chased away from Germany, where the church bells are ringing and shouts of joy are endless, now where we are no more separated from our German brothers and sisters for whom over such a long time their Germanness was bitterly bottled up and paid with blood for hundreds of years." Talking about the Austrians. "In this hour of deep emotion, my greetings to you with a Heil Hitler." The man who had dreamed up this trip, Dr. Colin Ross, sent a letter to me at home in December and invited himself and his wife and boy to our home for a meal Sunday before Christmas. So we entertained them, and then they left in their fancy automobile. And the following September, the war broke out. And in the October Milwaukee Journal, the headline screamed that Colin Ross was a foremost Nazi spy And this is what I copied from the journal. Dr. Colin Ross was born in 1885 in Vienna of Scottish parents. He lived for a number of years in Chicago, where his children went to school and his daughter attended the University of Chicago. Ross made a number of trips to the USA, posing as a lecturer, but actually engaging in espionage and propaganda work for the German government. Ross traveled about this country in a costly German-made automobile equipped with special camera devices wherewith he could and did photograph strategic places. Posing as a Scotsman, sometimes introduced as an American, he lectured to women's clubs and other organizations about the country at the rate of a man earning $25,000 a year. Oh, I'm sorry. His fees were often as low as $25 for an appearance, although he lived at the rate of a man earning $25,000 a year. His expenses and salary were actually paid by the German government. Ross arranged to have young American students tour Germany at the expense of the Nazi government. In a speech ridiculing democratic America, he said, "This is why followers of Hitler are the real 100% Americans." How blind can a man be? I'm closing with these reflections. I became very angry at this anti-Semitism in Germany. It really shocked me. I was impressed by their achievements. They claimed that there was no joblessness in Germany. Their four-lane highways, called the Autobahn, are interstate highways. We caught up to them in 1950s under Eisenhower. I was impressed by the music and the arts. I was impressed by the cleanliness in the country. And I was impressed by what the Germans say, Gründlichkeit, in English, efficiency. And yet all of this at the hideous cost of totalitarianism and the terrible Holocaust. And with that, I'll stop. That's it.
Thank you very much, Professor Hartwig. We would like to offer you all an opportunity to ask any questions that may have surfaced as you watch the presentation this evening. If you do have a question, simply raise your hand, and we have two assistants who will come around and bring a microphone to you so that everyone, including Professor Hartwig, can hear your question.
I'm all right. Thank you. Are there no questions? It always takes one person to prime the pump. Someone over there. Go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity for this question.
Louder.
What was Dr. Colander's stated purpose for organizing your trip?
To improve relations between Germany and intelligent Americans.
Oh, thank you.
Somebody else? Where? I could have seen him. Didn't make any difference.
How did you get chosen to be one of those intelligent Americans?
Now, careful. Are you asking how I lucked out?
Yeah, yeah.
That's a better way to say it. One evening, on my way to chapel at Northwestern College Prep, that was one school at the time, the president of the college stopped me on the way into the house of worship. And he told me that he wanted to speak, he was going to conduct worship that evening. He told me he wanted to speak to me after the service. Well, I didn't pay much attention to what was going on at the service that night. So I waited, and all the other students were out. And then the president told me that the college had been offered to choose one person to become a part of this tour to Germany. It would cost $100. Now, back in 1938, the equivalent, the modern equivalent of $100 would be in excess of $1,000, I'm sure. My father was a Lutheran pastor, and he didn't always get his pay. We were still in the Great Depression, and they simply could not afford the $100. And then his two sisters, who had good jobs in Milwaukee, came to his rescue and made the $100 available. And that's how I lucked out to be on the tour. Is there a hand here? Go ahead, nice and loud.
Did any of your German friends talk about how they waiting for Jews for the
No, that never came up. They didn't, by this time, this is 5 years after Hitler came to power, they had been brainwashed into thinking that Germany was never defeated. The Allies never entered Germany proper. So I'm assuming that they were not at all concerned about this. They had not really been defeated. Good question. Satisfied? Oh, the Weimar government. I didn't talk about the terrible inflation that took over in Germany. You needed a wheelbarrow full of paper money to buy a loaf of bread. And the Germans were really down and out. And Hitler and his followers intended to overthrow this government and make things right again. Well, then it didn't work out. His putsch failed. And then he decided that he would use legal means to get to power, by the vote. And that happened in 1933. He won supreme power by the vote. Okay? Okay?
I would like to know.
Where are you? Okay.
I would like to ask you.
See, I'm having that floodlight at me.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
know.
Ask your question.
I would like to know what the trains were like in those days. Were they very deluxe-like? I know that was a part of their big transportation.
You asked about the trains in Germany.
Yes.
Very good. Very smooth. Very comfortable. We traveled by train, by bus, and then for a boat ride and for a river ride by ship. Louder, please.
Neatness, cleanliness of the Germans.
Once again, please.
You had said something about the cleanliness and the neatness of the Germans.
Yes.
I had the opportunity to study there in 1991-92 at the Philipps Universität in Marburg through an exchange program with the University of Minnesota. And my experience there, and continuing in my correspondence, I have an uncle who sends me pictures of his incredible garden every year. I want to point out that is, if I remember correctly, 3 times the population or more in Germany and less than half the space in Minnesota. So they take great care of the small properties that they have, and yes, they are very clean and considerate of one another.
So you are confirming what I said.
Yes,
Did you see many flowers?
tons of them.
Yeah.
They highly value
Yeah.
their space and beautify everything.
Yeah. Well, things are loosening up. Yes, Rachel. Are you Rachel? No, Rachel's behind you. Can you take the mic? Here you are.
You mentioned that you and your friends and that took off 3 or 4 of you and walked here and there, but were there restrictions in where you could go, where you couldn't go, and were you free to kind of wander into different areas after all your touring?
We were given no restrictions. We could go where we wanted to go, as I did in Berlin. But then, if you were going to go where you wanted to go, you would have to use your money too. And I didn't have much. I could take only 4 rolls of film because I had to live on a tight budget. I went over with $50 spending money, and that had to be good for laundry and for souvenirs and for gifts.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, sir. Did you hear any stories from any of the locals about Teflahunden?
Just a minute.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't talking to the mic. Did you hear any stories about Teflahunden from any of the locals as a primary source, or about the Battle of Belleau Wood in World War I?
Would someone repeat that question? I couldn't make it out.
All right, I'll try. Sorry, sir. I was asking about the Teflahunden, or the Devil Dogs. I was wondering if you'd heard any stories about that from the locals, if anybody that brought that up ever in a conversation. The Marines?
Can't help you.
No, never heard them. All right, just wondered.
Yes.
I have a question. You said that at some of the places you stopped at, you received propaganda speeches.
I said what?
You received propaganda speeches. What were those usually like? Like, what did they talk about usually?
I spoke with what?
You said you received propaganda speeches.
Propaganda tea. Oh, yeah, we were exposed to a lot of that.
What were those speeches usually like? Like, did they
What
talk
were those
about the
speeches
Jews?
like? The glories of Nazism. And how much better Austria was off now that they had been annexed to Germany. Yeah, they were. Glories of Nazism.
Would you care to draw any parallels between the Austrian annexation and what's going on today with Crimea and Russia?
I'm 1938. I think that's an interesting question, and I think that since 97% of the Crimeans voted in favor of annexation, in favor of joining Russia, I think we should let that alone and not get entangled with that. That's my personal opinion. I think we're kicking up too much of a fuss. Personal opinion. Our president thinks differently. Anyone else?
Professor,
No. He was safely in Germany. Yeah.
Professor Hartwig, you have traveled extensively over the years.
Oh, here.
Right here?
Yeah, Karen.
And I'm just wondering, did this trip spark those wanting to travel more, or is that something you've always enjoyed doing?
I've always enjoyed traveling.
Okay.
And I've been over to Europe about 15 times since 1972. Yeah. With students, Karen? With students, MLC students, with non-students, and with family members, and by myself. Yes. And I enjoy traveling in America too, but I don't do any of that anymore. Okay, Steve?
My
Is there
question
somebody
was,
back there?
did you have any contact with any of the youths after the war that you spent your trip with?
Please, repeat.
Did you have any contact with the youths that you spent your trip with after the war was over?
No, I didn't.
Thank you.
We've come to the end of our time, but I hope you certainly enjoyed your evening with Professor Hartwig. How about one more round of applause and appreciation? I'd also like to thank several MLC organizations that helped make this evening possible. The MLC ALEC Committee was one of them, as well as the Lyceum, Alumni Relations, Student Senate, and the History Division. We'd also like to welcome you all back 1 month from tonight, April 29th. We have another World War II speaker, veteran Gene Schultz from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, will be here to share his memoirs and his presentation of his experience as a typist in the war room with Eisenhower and Patton. So please do come back and join us Tuesday evening, April 29th. Have a safe trip home this evening.
Oh, that's right.
We don't want to let you leave just yet, apparently.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you so much. I thought that went